For the statement, I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is very much lamentable that the membership of the Security Council has been compelled today to spend time and be present at a meeting which was initiated by our European colleagues purely to mark the latest New York stop on the tour of the well-known former actor. And here we see squeezed in as during the subway at rush hour, where we hear and will continue to hear mere replicated statements which have nothing to do with the true. There is no added value for the establishment of peace in Ukraine generated from today's meeting, which is obvious, and this will merely become yet another shameful episode in the market of hypocrisy, which is seen in the presentation of the Ukrainian theme by European states. European sponsors of the Zelensky regime want the United Nations Security Council to live as they do, in some kind of a parallel reality where Ukraine is not losing on the battlefield, losing city after city, and where Ukrainian citizens are queuing in line in order to die in the pointless slaughter for the advancement of Western geopolitical interests. This is a perverted picture which some are attempting to impose upon us. In this picture, Ukraine is an island of democracy and freedom. Its leader, usurper, broke his electoral pledge and has thrown thousands of fellow citizens into the dungeons. According to their picture, he is supported by all Ukrainians who apparently don't need any elections because they have such an outstanding president. Those who play into the hands of this Ukrainian puppeteer need to understand that essentially they're becoming complicit in the criminal manipulation, the purpose of which is to prevent a long-term just and lasting peace in Ukraine, which stipulates inter alia the development of such security guarantees that would preclude the threat of new conflict in Europe. This essentially is a conspiracy which is geared towards Ukrainians continuing to die, for Ukrainians to continue to die by the thousands in this senseless fratricidal slaughter which Western foes of the Russian Federation have been preparing for many years, seeking to weaken our country, to undermine our security and economic capability. What is unaddressed here is a perverse manifestation that is egregious for any civilized state, and not a single country in the neighborhood or any self-respecting country would tolerate this. Essentially, what is proposed inter alia is for us to turn a blind eye to the Kiev marionettes who are blind are mad with Russophobia and the permissiveness of their suzerains. They are not even considering rejecting the persecution of Russian citizens of Ukraine who are prohibited, contrary to the constitution of the country, prohibited from speaking in their mother tongue and teaching their children in their mother tongue. And before our very eyes, people under threat of death and persecution are forced to deny their own identity, their moral, historical roots and values, and the so-called European democracies are clapping and cheering, baselessly alleging that Russia allegedly is trampling upon the identity of Ukrainian identity. This was never a goal. This is an insolent lie advanced by the Kiev princeling to intimidate and brainwash the international community. It is proposed that we forget the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev, emboldened by impunity, which seized power following a coup sponsored by the West in breach of the UN Charter, which fired upon defenseless people in the southeast of Ukraine, using tanks and weapons, throwing bombs on them, and burning people alive in the trade union building, and mocking them just because they're Russian and refuse to accept the misanthropic ideology of the Kiev regime. And then the regime for 7 years under the smokescreen of the Minsk agreements was armed to the teeth, provided with intelligence data, and prepared for war with Russia, as was acknowledged by a number of European politicians who were directly complicit here. And we are called upon not to notice how Ukraine is glorifying those who, during the war, together with the Nazis, destroyed hundreds of thousands of Jews, Poles, Russians, Roma, Ukrainians, and not to notice how Ukrainian partners of Kiev shamefully are casting down their eyes when they see etched on the bodies of neo-Nazi Ukrainian fighters swastikas and other Nazi and neo-Nazi symbolism, which is prohibited in their own countries. Mr. President, in order to try to force the world to think on the basis of their own grotesque paradigm, the history, in their view, began in February 2022. They do not wish to recall the violations of the pledge not to expand NATO eastward, about the indivisibility of security, to expunge from people's memories the fact that of what they wrought in Kiev in 2014, cherry-picking from the UN Charter a single principle about respect for territorial integrity of states, forgetting about sovereign equality and non-intervention in domestic affairs, and the right of peoples to self-determination. They see a problem only in actions, which became a response to their own steps. On the go, they are supplanting international law with a so-called rules-based order, which is based on rules which they themselves concoct and impose upon others. The Ukrainian crisis is the direct result of their actions and their acts, which have been undertaken over the course of many years, despite all of our warnings and calls to disembark from that path, which is leading to catastrophe for that country. Today, this catastrophe is absolutely clear to all who, seeking to save their own skin, and the head of the Kiev regime who brought them to power. They are trying to undermine the efforts to establish a long-term peace in Ukraine. This country is not only has large-scale corruption, complete lawlessness, but also egregious double standards, which the collective West and media outlets under their control demonstrate in the Ukrainian context. Nowhere in the world, in no other context, has there been such consistent disregard for the indisputable violations of international humanitarian law by the Kiev regime, who have been using civilians as human shields and placing air defense systems in direct proximity to residential areas. This is resulting in tragedies linked to wreckage falling on homes from errant air defense missiles, which in any other which would not have happened because Russian aerospace capabilities, as was repeatedly seen, are carrying out purely high-precision strikes targeting objects related to military industrial capabilities of the Kiev regime. Moreover, in the majority of cases, these are responses to Ukrainian drone strikes targeting civilian objects in Russian cities, deliberately shelling Ukrainian deliberate shelling by Ukrainian nationalists of homes, schools, kindergartens, and hospitals, which people in the West are attempting not to notice. Unfortunately, this is also being indulged by the UN Secretariat, where any allegations from Kiev are supported, and the grim statistics which have been presented by Russia are disregarded. And this is an egregious violation of Article 100 of the UN Charter, which instructs UN staff to be objective, and this policy brings no honor to Antonio Guterres. It is clear to all that the EU and NATO are in a sticky situation with their anti-Russian Ukrainian project. They're confused and entangled, and they don't really know how to extricate themselves from the situation which they themselves placed themselves in. Washington was the first to see the light after the new administration took up its duties. However, instead of joining the efforts to establish peace in Brussels and allied capitals, they continue due to either inertia or deliberately to fan the flames of war continuously without any justification. They are mendaciously portraying Russia as an enemy, which inevitably will attack them as soon as it finishes off Ukraine. Today, this party of war lost sleep, trying to derail to undermine the results and understandings that were arrived at during the meeting of the Russian and U.S. presidents in Alaska 1 month ago, generating hysteria, including in this chamber in connection with the unsubstantiated allegations about the incursion into Poland of alleged Russian drones and alleged overflight in Estonia of Russian fighter jets. This is a brainwashing and indoctrination, attempts to blame Russia for their shortcomings and errors, and for their acute socioeconomic problems, which European communities which European societies face as a result of their own ill-conceived sanctions, measures only to be compared to the designs of German and Italian the Germans and the Italians during the Second World War. This is what this can be compared to. And this manipulations, and these manipulators, having learned a bitter lesson from history, throw up their hands and allege that they did not recognize what would happen as a result of their actions. Mr. President, the contours of the future peace in Ukraine are well known to all of us. And also what is clear is that the presentation of the Kiev regime about how this will look has nothing to do with reality, merely dooming thousands of Ukrainian citizens who do not wish to go to the front, dooming them to pointless death. Just yesterday on a Ukrainian television channel, one of the then propagandists lamented that many Ukrainians there were many Ukrainians rounded up on the streets, but they, I quote, they ran out quickly. And therein lies the cynical essence of the Kiev regime. Do you align yourselves with them when it comes to this an enviable plight of Ukrainian citizens who are still alive? If you are not indifferent to the plight of these people, then we are awaiting your support and genuine efforts in order to attempt to probe the contours of a realistic long-term, lasting peace to end this war which the criminal clique began in 2014. We are not abandoning any negotiations formats. We advocate purely serious, substantive, clear-sighted negotiations, nor are we rejecting negotiations with Ukraine, despite the highly dubious, to put it mildly, legitimacy of its current authorities. The optimal format for this has already been identified, that is negotiations platform in Istanbul, and the rest will be set out after experts lay down their groundwork. And unfortunately, there's a long road ahead. To conclude, I wish to recall the prophetical words which were uttered on the sidelines of High-Level Week of the General Assembly 2 years ago by Polish President Andrzej Duda. And I quote, "Ukraine is like a drowning man. It is dragging us into the depths." End of quote. Today, such drowning men are many of those who spoke in this chamber. If you accept this inglorious fate, then you can continue to do nothing and continue in the same vein. If not, then there's a great deal of work which lies ahead. We stand ready to do this work, and now it is up to you to make that choice. Thank you for your attention.